Faster than a fraudulent performance measure, stronger than a misplaced decimal point, able to leap complex compliance requirements at a single bound. It's Super Auditor! Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Auditors Save the World, one audit project at a time, where we bring you thrilling tales of daring audits and brave financial reviews. Here, our heroes don't wear capes, but they do wield the power of empirical evidence. Brought to you by the pros at Yellowbook-CPE. In each episode, we interview those legendary auditors who have truly rescued the day. Stay tuned, listeners, because this is one story you won't want to miss. And folks, don't forget to subscribe to our show in your podcast app of choice. And now, here's your host, Lita Hart-Fanta.
Today's tale, The Pen is Mightier Than City Hall. In this week's special episode, our Cape Crusader isn't an auditor at all. But fear not, citizen, for the forces of truth and accountability know many forms. She's the ink-stained avenger of the press, the watchdog of the watchdogs, the relentless reporter with a spine of steel and a nose for justice, Sue Ann, with nothing but a notepad, a laptop, and an unshakable sense of right and wrong. Sue Ann stood tall against corruption in City Hall, shining light where others feared to look. Harassed, silenced, and shown the door by those she exposed, she still never backed down. Because in her world, there aren't just two sides to every story, there are three. So tune in, true believers, as we uncover the parallels between auditors and investigative journalists and learn how asking the hard questions just might save the world. Well, let's talk about, what do you think your purpose is as a journalist? What drives you to be a journalist?
What drives me is exposing. I speak as an investigative journalist. What drove me was to not just inform people, but to expose waste and mismanagement, particularly in government and in our crown corporations, and to be as objective as possible. But as I became a columnist, to make my opinions or to create my opinions or to write my opinions based on solid research. So doing my homework. I find today that journalists do not do their homework. They just accept the pap that is handed to them. They're lazy and not informed.
Tell me what your homework looks like. So give me an example.
Oh, Lita, I would spend on an average day, if I was working on a story, I would spend probably 6 hours. So on an average 8-hour day, I would spend 6 hours actually researching what I was going to write about, which would include interviews, any sort of write-ups, reading reports, interpreting the reports. Since I covered City Hall for many, many years, I read too many reports to count. I can't even remember how many.
Yeah.
People would marvel at what I would go through. And reading the reports, doing the appropriate interviews, getting answers to questions, and getting both sides of the story. So if I was writing in particular about, say, that you had, you were criticized in some report, I would make darn sure before I wrote my story that I got some comment from you or reached out to you for comment.
Yeah.
Whether you actually commented or not is another story.
Yeah. Now, so tell me about these reports. Are these audit reports? Are these consulting reports? What kind of reports are you talking about?
Well, at Toronto City Hall, which I covered for more than 20 years, they'd have various committees. So the committees would meet every month and they would produce reports on various policy issues.
Yeah.
One of the committees being the audit committee. And yes, I spent a lot of time going through audit reports. I had particular interests in what I covered. So I would go through committee reports. And as soon as I saw something that I felt would be of interest to my readers. Now, when I say I had interest, it was whatever was of interest to my readers. I would go through those reports, whether they were, and I got very adept at siphoning through them so that, for instance, an auditor's report would always have an executive summary. So that made life a
Mm,
little bit easier than
yeah.
going through a 72 or 75
Mhm.
page report.
Right, right. So what kind of things, uh, to your memory, I know it's been a little bit since that's been your job, but what piqued your interest? What kind of things caught your eye?
Um, well, it's very interesting because I was always considered, right of center and we don't want to talk politics, but I was always considered or stereotyped as a somebody who had no heart and no interest in helping the little guy, but I was actually the champion of the underdog, and I
Mm,
would spend a lot of time covering the little guy. My book in 2016 is called Underdog because I would cover stories about people, who were forced to take a tree down, for example,
mm,
or whatever, and had problems with City Hall.
mhm.
And what particularly piqued my interest was Toronto Community Housing Authority. That is the largest social housing authority in North America.
Oh,
And
wow.
the management was corrupt.
Mm,
They were using the money they got to throw parties for themselves,
mm.
to give themselves bonuses that they should not have been giving, to give
Yeah.
themselves increases. And as a matter of fact, the auditor back then who I became very, I guess, tight with and who trusted me was the one who blew the lid on that report. Now, the
Mm.
woman who led the Toronto Community Housing Authority uh, was pushed out and she went off to Goodwill and managed to make Goodwill go down the tubes in Canada. There's no longer a Goodwill in Canada. So
Wow.
these
Wow.
people just move from place to place
Right.
and, they resurface somewhere else and ruin something else, and so that was a particular interest. The homeless business, because it is an industry, I covered for years and years and years. I won an investigative reporting award for all the money that was going into activism and so-called caregivers and agencies and not going directly to get homeless off the streets. And I
Mm.
continued to cover that until I retired in 2021.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's good stuff there. I've never heard of homelessness as an industry, but that makes a lot of sense, what you're
Well,
saying.
there's not only a homeless industry, but there's a
Mhm.
poverty industry in
Mm,
Canada, and there's a drug industry,
mm.
and they all share the same sort of common theme. They're activists involved with this industry who want to keep it propped up and want, in my estimation, and what I found over my 31 years in the business, is they want to keep these people dependent on them. So, because if they solved homelessness, if they solved drug addiction, if
Mm.
they solved poverty, they would not have jobs. So, these poor people,
Wow.
as I found out in the homeless industry, I would have homeless people coming to me and saying, "I really wanna get a job. I wanna get off handouts," and these people are not helping me. They will not
Mm,
help me to get a job. They just
mm,
wanna keep me dependent, and I
mm,
wrote many, many stories on that.
mm. Now, as a result of those stories, for any set of those stories are all fascinating.
Mhm.
Did you see, changes occur in government?
I got a couple people fired
Yeah?
for being corrupt. Yeah, the head of the Pan Am Games, I blew the lid on, their mismanagement, and he got fired, and they brought somebody else in who I'm afraid wasn't any better, and I exposed the waste in the Pan Am Games. Of course, those things are all, there are money pits, those kinds of things, whether it's
Mm,
the Olympics or the Pan
mm,
Am Games.
mhm,
And yes, I got a couple of people pushed out the door with my investigative pieces. The homeless industry, let's just say a true test of how well I did is that the homeless activists absolutely hated me. The poverty industry absolutely
mm,
hated me
mm.
because, um, I I exposed what they were doing.
'Cause they wanna come off as heroes, and you were
Yeah.
saying they were not heroes, and that
No.
was an insult to them. and being transparent about what they were doing,
Mhm.
they were not comfortable with that at all.
No, because, the one thing that, worked in my advantage is that I have a really good facility with numbers. I have an MBA, and I would pour through budgets. I loved investigative reporting. It was like detective work,
Mhm.
and I, would follow the dots. And that is a big problem, Lita, with the industry now, I'm not talking about the journalism business now.
Yeah.
Nobody follows the dots. Investigative reporting is a dying art. It is an
Mhm.
art. It
Mhm.
takes a lot of time and energy,
Mhm.
and you have to learn to follow the dots.
Mhm.
And I would spend when I was actually put on the investigative beat for a couple of months by the editor, and I would sit up at 11 and 12 at night because it was so fascinating trying to research when I
Mhm.
would get on to certain things.
Mhm.
Now, when it came to Toronto Community Housing, for example, I found out, and I embarrassed them, and I embarrassed the mayor, that they had all these empty units while they were claiming that they couldn't get people, into, units. They had all these empty units that
Mm.
were sitting vacant, and I would go out and film them and say, "Well, what
Mm.
about these? What about those?"
Mm.
So, it was
Mm.
a lot of fun. It was a lot of work, but it was a lot of fun.
And you're saying nowadays that journalists don't have the luxury of spending time on that? Is that what you think it is? Or you think they just aren't being trained? Or what do you think's
I
going
think
on?
yes. I think it's all above, I all of the above. I think that journalists were, a lot of them were laid off, the industry has shrunk, and I think that with the advent of Twitter and social media and Facebook, there's a lot of people out there reporting, doing gotcha journalism. And I think that papers can't afford to put somebody on an investigative, story for months and months. They can't
Uh-huh.
afford to do that. They just don't have the budgets to do it. But I
Mhm.
also think that people who are trained in journalism now are so woke, are so that they look at something from a very narrow prism, and
Mm.
they're not taught to look at all sides of the story. I used to
Mhm.
say that there was not just 2 sides of the story, there are 3 sides of the story, and they're not taught or they aren't encouraged, and I think
Mhm.
it often happens that way, to ask hard questions.
Yeah.
They don't wanna. So I would stand in scrums. Scrums are when question somebody, whether it's a bureaucrat or a politician. I would stand in scrums, usually the shortest person,
Yeah.
and everybody would, throw out what we call their softballs,
Right.
and then little ol' me would hit them with a hard question.
Right.
And they'd be waiting for me like, "Let Mikey try, let Mikey."
Mm.
And,
Sure.
they but nobody follows up on
Mm.
stories.
Yeah.
I was really good at that. Like, I would follow up on stories.
Mhm.
I'd do something on X, and then a couple weeks later, I'd say, "Hey, whatever happened to that? They
Mhm.
made this promise." And lo and behold, I'd find
Mm.
out that they never fulfilled that promise, whether it was a politician or a bureaucrat or whatever. But, the journalists are like they take the press releases now, they take a
Mhm. Right.
statement, and they just regurgitate it. We
Yeah.
have a word for
Crazy.
it. I talk about it in my book. They say you're either a reporter or a repeater. I was a reporter. Most of the journalists today are repeaters.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
just regurgitate what is handed them like pablum.
Right. They just take like a tweet or they take something that was in
Yeah,
a major newspaper and they just
yeah.
like summarize it and throw it right back out there.
Well, and the pack journalism was just terrible. When I was based at City Hall in Toronto, and they would all check with each other to see who was like, what was the story of the day.
Mhm.
They were supposed to be competitors, but they all would check with each other. What are
Ah.
you working on? What are you working on? Of course, they never
Mm.
asked me because I was never working on what they were working on.
Mm. Right. Right. Wow. So, do you think that comes down to them also being afraid they might lose their job if they are not in alignment with the editors or the leaders of the community? Like, could they lose their gig?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. And that almost happened to me.
Yeah.
in 2020 during the pandemic.
Yeah.
And I had a long history at the Toronto Sun. I was there for 30 years. And the mayor of the city had made a lot of mistakes during the pandemic. He made a lot of promises and didn't fulfill them. And he snuck a lot of things in, like bike lanes during the pandemic, took money that was supposed to go towards COVID and put in, pet projects. And at the beginning of the pandemic, he snuck off to London, England for a business trip when he should have been there, and everybody in Toronto, and there was a lockdown. The lockdown was just commencing, and I made the mistake, but I never reported any differently. I made a mistake of naming everybody that went on his business trip with him. Well, it turns out one of the people on his business trip who probably wasn't supposed to be named was the girlfriend that he was later exposed to have had an affair with.
Oh boy.
And she's 35 years his junior. He ended up resigning. And I was hauled in and disciplined over, some ridiculous thing was cooked up, and he almost cost me my job
Ugh.
because I guess I had named this person, and maybe his wife had no idea that he'd gone with her.
No, Lord.
And, and I was just in sort of an innocent pawn in this little game. So I had my own experiences, but yes, that fear is very prevalent today, especially with jobs.
And now, a word from our sponsor. Today's episode is brought to you by Yellowbook-CPE, the heroes behind the jumbo bundle of self-study courses. With a 1-year subscription, you get access to over 170 hours of top-notch CPE content. Dive into thrilling tales of agile, IT auditing, fraud, and internal controls. All courses carry NASBA's quality seal, so you know they've got the superpower of trustworthiness. Just click the link in the description to sign up. And now, back to our story.
I'm hearing a lot of parallels with your approach in journalism to auditing, because auditors are supposed to be shielded from,
Right.
repercussions when they tell the truth. But that's really a rare situation because usually they're internal auditors and they report to, and they function alongside of executives that they're, reporting on. And so there
Mhm.
are politics that go on. It's not ideal, right? But that is the truth. And so a lot of auditors are careful about what they say and what they even look at. Like
Yeah.
what they even stir up.
Yeah.
Because they know that it's going to cause them trouble and impact their audit shop. And they could lose their job, they could lose staffing, funding, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And it's the same thing goes for journalists. And so
Mhm.
you've got this very biased media now,
Mhm.
certainly in Canada and in the States.
Mhm.
And I was never like that. I was like the salmon swimming upstream.
Mhm.
And luckily, when it was 2020, it was near the tail end of my career. So I could withstand. I was very, very upset with what happened,
Right.
obviously, because I was an award-winning journalist. I had had
Mhm.
many front page stories, but the landscape has totally changed,
Yeah.
and that's the reality now.
So from a consumer of media
Mm.
perspective, knowing that it's just an echo chamber where,
Mhm.
and no one really digs very few people dig very far. How can an average citizen like me really find out what's going on about an issue? Like
Well,
like to me, whenever I listen to the media, I'm like, yeah, sure. Yeah, sure, okay. That's what you think it is? And I always doubt. I'm very skeptical of what I hear. What would you recommend that an average citizen does to make sure that we're not misled by the media?
Well, that's an interesting question, Lita, because I think the great rise in independent journalism has been because of this, because the
Mhm.
mainstream, or as we call it, the legacy media, aren't delivering the
Mhm.
facts, or they're delivering it in a very biased manner. I started to
Mhm.
see that at City Hall, where I'd be in uh, say, a meeting, and my competition, uh, from another paper would report on very fluffy top line stuff, and I'd get into the meat of it, and I said, like, "Were we at the same meeting?" So,
Oh,
I think the
okay.
advent of independent media in
Uh-huh.
the last couple years, the surge and the decline in the, MSM, the mainstream media, or the MSM as I call it, has been indicative of people just thirsting for,
Mhm.
facts and for insights that they're not gonna get on, say, MSNBC or CNN, or, in Canada, CBC, CTV,
Mhm.
any of those, or our case, the Toronto Star. I mean, I'm naming some of these people
Mhm.
who've seen a huge decline in their viewership or readership, um, and, in the States, they took the lead with the independent media, but now it's really starting to take off in Canada. And
Now, who's paying for the independent media to do their work? Where's that money coming from?
so, yeah, it's interesting because in Canada, there's been this huge, huge bailout, of the legacy media since COVID, and it never stopped,
Mm.
by,
Mhm.
well, the Liberal government, and,
Mhm. Mm.
independent
Mm.
media survive on donations, pretty
Oh,
much, reader
donations.
donations.
Holy cow.
And memberships
Mhm.
and a
Mhm.
few foundation grants, but that's
Mhm.
about it. It's all subscriber based. So
Mm.
you're getting
Mm.
people
Mm.
subscribing who truly wanna hear what you have to say.
Wow. And that's hard to find that audience, I would expect.
Well, like I said, there's a huge thirst for
Mhm. Mhm.
the, I guess the facts as they're not presented in the left, well, I was gonna say the legacy media,
Mhm.
but it takes time to build it up. It certainly does take time.
Mhm.
There's been a very successful media company, they're a little, out there, called Rebel Media in Canada, and
Mhm.
he is all subscriber based, completely, and he's
Mm.
grown it like a business.
Mm.
The politicians hate him because,
Mm.
and I'm very proud of what he's done, and he
Mm.
has really taken off in the last couple of years.
I'll be darned. That is fascinating. So, to me, when I read any media piece, I can sniff out the bias, right? But when I
Uh-huh.
look
Yeah.
at some of these independent media pieces, they feel like they are full of opinion more than
Mhm.
facts. Can you speak to that a little bit? Like, where do you draw the line between an op-ed piece, like, and a
Mhm.
factual reporting the facts of a situation?
Well, at the, digital platform that I freelance for, Juno News, I'll give a shameless plug, True North, we have a combination of, just reporting, and
Mhm.
I'm actually the only op-ed writer, and then they have, a lot of these independent media have gone, with visuals now, with video. And there's been some interesting video when they're on the scene of, whatever being thrown out of some place or some other place.
Mm.
By the way,
Mm.
I you haven't made it in the journalism business unless you're thrown out of a town hall or two,
That's great.
which I
That's a
can I
badge of
can say to
honor.
my credit. Yeah, by
Yeah.
4 armed police officers in my case. Anyway, I think, uh, they try to have a mix. I think, the ones certainly that I know in Canada, um, they have they have to, even though they're subscriber based, they have to toe the line with, now, don't confuse independent media with sort of the people who hold up their cell phone and take, whatever, or their iPhone and take a couple things and then are on X displaying whatever. Those are the gotcha journalists,
Okay.
independent
All right. Good.
citizen
So we're
journalists.
so we're drawing a line. Okay. So
Yeah.
gotcha is the sensational
Well,
little
the
video
citizen
clip on
journalists.
X.
Yeah, they're citizen journalists. So there's a lot of
Okay.
citizen journalists out there,
Okay. Gotcha.
who take video of,
Mhm.
various and sundry events. But I have gotten a few story angles from them because, I mean, I
Sure.
don't sensationalize it, but I get a few story angles from them.
Right.
But they're out at different events and they take video. There's one in Canada who has done an excellent job. All she's done for the last I've gotten to know her in the last 2 years. She was a lawyer, and she's basically a citizen journalist. Her name's Karima, and she does protests, and she's during the recent election, did rallies and got thrown out of a few, and she covers all these protests, and she's actually very objective. I don't
Mm,
know what side she lands on, but she's been treated terribly by the
mm,
mainstream media,
huh.
which is another thing that's going on now,
Mm,
that the mainstream media hates independent journalists because they've started to, be accepted, um, by politicians and other bureaucrats, and there's a real campaign on to try
mm.
and silence them because they embarrass them with hard questions, and they ask things that the mainstream media has been, will not ask for fear they'll lose their jobs.
Mhm. So the mainstream media wants the independence to go away because it makes it
Them look
takes away
foolish.
eyes from them, takes away
Yeah.
subscriptions from them.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, they make them look foolish because they should be asking these questions and they don't.
gotcha, sure.
So, yeah. So,
Okay.
over the last couple months, independent journalists have been at various political events and they've asked questions. They've been allowed to when they've been allowed to. And that's sort of, you know, uh, it's sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes they're allowed. It's always at the whim of whomever is hosting the event.
Mm,
But they've asked hard questions, and a few of the independent media, I mean, the, mainstream media had meltdowns over it, just absolute meltdowns, and we're all over X complaining that the independent media, don't deserve to be covering this sort of stuff, but they
that just doesn't make any sense.
well, the legacy media is totally disconnected from reality. We see it in the States, we see it in
Mhm.
Canada. They're signing their own death now by not,
Mm.
being more, um, in
Edgy
touch with
and
what
real.
yeah,
Mhm.
well,
Mhm.
but not being more in touch with what the average listener or viewer or
Mhm.
reader wants,
Mhm.
and, the pollsters are the same. It's interesting that the pollsters are disconnected from, you
Mhm.
know, what the average, um I guess, voter or constituent or whatever you wanna call it wants to
Yeah,
hear.
how did it happen to the pollsters?
Well, you saw it in the States with the recent election, yes, and we saw it in Canada where they are all way, way off in their predictions, way, way off, and
Mm,
this has
sure.
been a trend in the last couple years. So, between the media being out of touch with reality and not reading the room, and the pollsters not reading the room, it's no wonder that people are turning to independence, and
Mhm.
even some citizen journalists like Karima.
Mhm. Right. Fascinating. So, do you think that's coming from the very top? Like we've got, these moguls owning
Mm.
mainstream media
Mhm.
and their agenda, their political agenda. Do you think that's filtering through the entire organization and also with pollsters? Like do you think that's what's happening?
I think there's a lot of nepotism, and yes, I do think that it's filtering from the top. I
Yeah.
think they they don't I mean, let me give you an example. Jeff
Mhm.
Bezos bought the Washington
Post.
Post,
Yep.
and he's tried to make some changes, and everybody went nuts. They'd
Right.
been used to a certain way of doing things, and a couple people quit, and they just walked out like they're spoiled dilettantes, some of them,
Mm.
and they walked out. I thought, "You're never gonna get a job in the media again." I think the owners very much dictate, uh, what is going to happen, and in many ways, it hasn't been in a good way. It was the Los Angeles Times. The father took over. There was a recent story. The daughter was not covering a whole range of topics
Mhm.
that would appeal to the average reader.
Mhm.
They were losing readership, and the father took over. I think that the there is certainly a, if you want to, I hate the words, but corporate agenda. Yeah, I mean, it's not a secret that there are certain you know legacy media, whether it be in broadcasting or in print, that are politically aligned with a particular party,
Yeah.
and the same as in Canada.
Right.
And I experienced the wrath of the owners of of the Toronto Sun for upsetting a politician. So,
Right.
you know, I've seen it firsthand.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Whew, what we do is so dangerous
Yes, yes, it is.
if we're
Well,
doing it right. If
yeah,
auditors and journalists are doing it right, it's a very tentative existence because
yeah.
we are going to make somebody mad. That's kind of the purpose of our
Oh,
existence.
lead eye makes people mad
Yeah.
every day,
Yeah.
every day. And so I would make the activists mad. I'd get chased out of parks because I covered encampments and they wanted to keep people in the parks,
Yeah.
living on in tents. I'd get, I'd upset the drug activists. I mean, it just, and then it became that my own paper became very afraid of media. I mean, legal recourse. So
Ah,
in the latter years, I'd write a lot about anti-Semitism and about the anti-Semites, and they use lawfare. They started using lawfare to try and
lawfare.
silence me.
Okay.
So
Wow.
that's another thing they do. They use lawfare to try and silence you.
So tell me more about that. Tell me more about lawfare. I've not heard those words together, but that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
Tell
the
me about that.
so a particular anti-Semite didn't like the way I covered an event. Um, for instance, in Toronto, there was a woman who ran a store. It was a catering business called Food Benders, and actually, I was very successful in driving her out of business, but only because she was a rabid anti-Semite, and she had posted that she didn't want any Zionists in her store. And of course, I turned up
Right.
with money to buy a salad, and she sold it to me, and then I said I was a Zionist, and I said, "You let me into your store," and then everything started to take off. Well,
Mm.
uh, she had a lawyer who's not very um, sympathetic of Jews or Israel, and he filed a couple cases in court. And then what happens is you get hit with defamation cases. I was just
Wow.
hit with another one in the last couple months where they use um, the courts and to try and silence you by making you spend money to defend yourself,
Gosh.
making you spend a lot of money to defend
Mhm.
yourself, dragging it
Mhm.
out. The lawyer she had dragged it out, and then, of course, they capitulate at the 11th hour when you're supposed to go to court because they realize they
Gotcha.
don't have a case. But
Yeah.
you've already had a
You've already
law
spent
firm.
thousands
Yeah,
and thousands of
yeah,
dollars. Yeah.
and they're very good at doing that now. And then the interesting
Mm.
thing is that the Jewish community is just catching on to doing it themselves to go after anti-Semites who have harassed
Mm.
students. And
Mm.
I mean, we
Mm.
were very quiet people up to the last 19 months. So,
Mm.
but anyway, I saw it over the years,
Mhm.
and or they'd shout at you at an event that you
Mhm.
turn up to and try to
Mm.
single you out, and
How do
kind of
you
intimidate
say
you.
like, okay, so when you began as a journalist,
Mhm.
I'm sure you didn't have the tough skin that you have now where you're just like, "Whatever." I mean,
Yeah.
what how did you just get knocked around and suffer a
Yeah.
lot of anxiety and anger and stress? I mean, tell us about that journey.
Ah,
That must have been
well, when I
incredible.
retired, it took 2 years to undo the stress, but I
Mhm,
think what happens is you keep doing it, and I was fueled by a motivation to, or a mission to expose corruption and mismanagement,
mhm,
and then you have many, many successes over the years,
mhm,
many successes, and you, have a lot of followers. I had little old ladies before email. I mean, we're talking a span of 30 years. I had little old ladies who would write me, or men write me letters in their longhand and send them to me, thanking me. And your boy, I did it for my readers.
mhm.
And don't believe a single politician who says, "I do it for my constituents." They don't. But I did do it for my readers because there was no upside other than that. It was the readers, and, I connected with them. I connected with I have friends from Toronto Community Housing to this day who I helped out. And, I don't know if you know that I met my wife on a story.
Oh, no,
Um,
I didn't know
I
that.
wrote about I went out to help her. She was having trouble with City Hall, and I met her, and, the rest is history.
Yeah.
We're about to celebrate our 16th anniversary, so
Oh,
hey.
congratulations.
Yeah.
That's
So,
nice.
it there were a lot of upside. I mean, I think the idea that I could help people and that I could, make their lives a little bit better,
Mhm.
it really kept me going.
Now tell me,
And
you just said something, sorry, I'm gonna interrupt you there. You said the politicians are not out for their constituents. You don't believe it when they say that.
very
You s
few are,
Yeah,
very few.
there have to be
Uh,
some that are.
there are, and I
Mhm.
did know some during
Yeah.
my travels,
Mhm.
and I still know some,
What
but,
are what are they in it for? Self-aggrandizement? I mean,
yeah,
what are they just to make
power,
this power?
ego,
Ugh.
narcissism,
Mhm.
money.
Mhm.
Some of them have gotten very rich being a politician
Mhm.
with,
Yeah.
side hustles.
Yeah.
Yeah, I yes, I have to
Side
tell you
Uh,
I got very disenchanted with the political game, and I
yeah,
covered it for
sure.
almost 30 years. Very
Mhm.
cynical about politicians,
Mhm.
and,
Yeah,
I just don't think they represent I think they've lost touch with the common man.
sure. Yep. Now, you also said something earlier that I wanna come back to, and I really liked it. You said there's 3 sides to every story.
Yeah.
Can you go into that a little bit more? Can you unpack that
Okay,
a little
so
bit?
it's what you read in a report, for example, and say I was doing an auditor's report. I'll
Yeah.
talk in your language.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
I'd say whatever was in the report, I'd report on. Then I would go to the people who were criticized in that report. Very
Mhm.
often they didn't comment, or
Mhm.
they would just issue a statement
Mhm.
because they didn't think they were very accountable.
Mhm.
And then there's the person who is impacted by it.
I
So
see.
if, for
Okay.
example, that they're writing about Toronto community housing, and the auditor that I absolutely loved at City Hall, Jeff Griffiths, did a lot of work on that, and I started going to meetings because of him. I started going, and they'd hate that I'd show up at these meetings
Mm.
and
Mm.
watch them. And
Mm.
one time they locked me out. That was
Oh, is
very
that
funny.
right?
Yes. Oh my
Wow.
god.
Even though it's
Yeah.
a public
Yes.
forum, that was
Yes.
illegal doing that, right? Because
Yeah.
it's open records. Okay.
Yeah. But
Okay.
there's nobody to challenge them, that's the problem.
Sure. There's no
Nobody's
oversight body saying
no,
you did the wrong thing.
no.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, Lita, um, I did a whole, this is interesting, I did a whole, uh, in investigative report on a public-private partnership. It was called Regent Park, where they completely redeveloped this really poor slum area of where Toronto community housing people lived, and they were gonna make it combination of market rent apartment buildings and have the Toronto community housing people live in other low rises, and it went grossly over budget. There was a
Mm.
lot of problems with it. They pushed the poor out and didn't let them back in.
Oh my.
They duped them,
Ugh.
and there were so many questions about it. They actually got a judge to review the
Whoa.
whole. Yeah, so I felt
Okay.
pretty proud of it. But then, of course, the judge came back and said, uh, you know, sugar-coated
Mm.
basically what went on,
Mm.
and,
Uh-oh.
this is the problem. And I had other media attack me, see? She made a big deal about nothing, and this is what would
Ah.
go on. Like,
Ah.
major paper, "Oh, she made a
Mm.
big deal about nothing." See?
Mm. Ah. Because their strings are being pulled by politicians,
Yes.
owners, who
Yeah,
are the power brokers of the
yeah,
whole
yeah,
community, and they don't like the story getting out,
yeah,
and they want it to tamp down as fast as
yeah,
possible.
yeah, yeah,
Wow.
yeah,
Gross.
yeah, oh, yeah. Oh,
Gross.
for
Yeah.
sure. And there were many things like that, that went on. I covered a guy who got this really lucrative deal, from a corrupt politicians at City Hall to run a restaurant on prime real estate, near the lakefront in Toronto. So
Mhm.
that would mean he'd make a ton of money, and he had
Sure.
the sole, his contract
Rights to
allowed
do
him
it.
to have the.
Right.
Yeah, and I started writing about him, and I would get chased away out of his restaurant.
Sure. Sure.
Yeah. No wonder I took up running.
Yeah. Wow.
Mhm.
So you went through all that emotional turmoil. What do you think? So you did it for your readers. They would give you
Yeah,
feedback. Thank you
yeah,
for that.
yeah.
Uh, but there was still probably some ripples. I mean, getting kicked out sounds kind of, noble and everything, but still
Mhm.
upsetting, I would think, for, a
I
long
stopped
period of
being.
time.
Yeah, I was very upset when the cops, the four-armed cops led me out of a town hall, and that
Yeah.
was pretty
Yeah.
late in my career. That was already
Yeah.
2018,
Wow.
2019.
Wow.
Um, but I turned it into a story. So, I'm the
Oh.
kind of person who always makes,
Mhm.
something positive out of a
Mhm.
negative.
Mhm.
And,
Great.
then other people, you're not supposed to become part of the story, but in this case, it needed to be told because this was a real issue.
Mhm.
They were trying to put in a healing lodge in a part of Toronto, and another healing lodge is an Indigenous healing lodge,
Mhm.
and they wouldn't say who was going in there, and as it turned out, it was women who were, criminals and hadn't been convicted yet or were on parole. They were really rough characters.
Mm.
And a similar healing lodge, someone had escaped and murdered a little child. So people were not quite naturally
Mm.
disturbed about what was going on.
Mm. Wow. Fascinating. You're part of the dying breed, it seems like.
Yes, and that's why I keep writing because
Yeah.
I think there are stories still to be told.
Mhm.
And,
Mhm.
I pick and choose now very much, but there are stories still to be told.
Thank you, brave listeners, for joining us on this adventure. We appreciate your loyalty. Take a moment to subscribe and share this podcast with all your audit allies. And don't miss out on Yellowbook-CPE's upcoming webinars. Because every superhero needs their training, and Yellowbook-CPE offers continuing education that's relevant, convenient, and as thrilling as the fight for justice. Until next time, audit on!